Nicole.
Hello.
I'm so excited to be closing out my gratitude interviews with you, even though you were supposed to be in the middle of them.
Well, thank you for being gracious when life happens.
Life definitely happens.
If 2020 has taught us anything.
Anymore. I honestly don't think we have any choices anymore. I think we just have to be so full of grace right now. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. I was thinking about this being the first day of July and like, okay, how do we prepare? How do we prepare our hearts and soul for a new month? Every month has seemed to give us something we weren't prepared for. So,
right? I think that it is really, I think that is such a really good point. Like, it's July. Like, how did July even come, and how do we prepare for the next couple of months?
I always say that my greatest ability to succeed at things is to be able to solve problems in the moment. And I think that this has been like a life skill that I've had to live out over the last 6 months. Like, how do you solve the current problem at hand? Right? Like, do we even get a look 2 months ahead? Do we get a look 6 months ahead? I don't think so. Not in this way. It's like, how do we be successful? We manage what's happening today in the right now.
That's right. That's totally right. So you introduce yourself and tell the people who are watching a little bit. I've got an eyelash in my eye, so this is good timing. A little bit about who you are and what you do.
Okay, so I am Nicole Whiting. I am a life coach. I'm also an ultra runner. I'm a nature lover. I am a mother. I am a wife. I mean, I guess we could keep naming. I'm a property manager. I'm a friend, you know, all of these things that I am. But really, if I were to really say anything, is I hope that I'm someone that people look at and they're like, okay, if she can do it, I can do it. That's really that's really at the end of the day, my goal as a human is to help other humans find their way and believe in themselves. I always tell people I carry enough belief for both of us. And I really think that's like the epitome of who I am is that.
I love that so much. I love it so much. So good. So let's talk about gratitude for a minute, shall we?
Yes.
So when you and I were talking a while back, and I think we were just having one of our lovely shoot the shit conversations. And I was telling you that I wanted to interview a whole bunch of folks about gratitude. And I think the conversation, because I was talking about my imperfect gratitude practice, and I think the conversation was, you were like, why would you? I don't have one. I know I'm supposed to, but I don't really have one. So my first question for you is actually, do you have a regular gratefulness practice? And if so, what is it?
So recently I took like the VIA strength test, like basically tells you the things that you're great at. And discipline was like number 23 out of 25 on the list. So if that tells you anything about me, is that I am not the most disciplined in anything in life, which is also really interesting because I run 100-mile races, and you would think that to be able to do that, you would have to be really disciplined. This is actually a really great skill that I have, is not being super disciplined and being able to do some really great things in my life. So do I have a very formal gratitude practice? I absolutely do not. I am a very messy human across the board, and I hope that gives other people the permission to be a messy human too. But that's also the way my gratitude practice is. It's pretty messy, but when I need it, I can really pull into it. And when it's in a stage of my life where it's really important and it's really necessary, I'm able to pull into that. And for me, that's the beauty of it. It has become a tool in my toolbox. And I think in life, we don't always use all the tools all the time. Like, different seasons of life, different challenges create the opportunity to use different tools. And so am I a daily, I would say that I express gratitude, but not because it's become a ritual, because it's become a part of who I am and the way that I actually look at the world.
I really, really love that so much. Liz Irish just said, I'm messy.
Oh, I mean, aren't we all? I just like, I, as a coach, you get people that come to you and like they want to be perfect. I'm like, this is not the time. This is not the place. Like, we are inherently messy human beings. And like, if we can embrace that part of us.
And we're supposed to be messy. But I think the power of what you said is that you have this messy practice, but that it's so powerful that you're able to pull yourself into it, and you have this self-awareness to know when you're like, "Ooh, I got to get into that gratitude space so I can continue going on." Is that what happens? Like, is there something that happens where you're like, "Okay, now I've got to think about the things I have so that I can move forward and get the things I want"?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, I think that I've become very self-aware. I mean, and I think that's part of it, is that I know when my mind is in a place that's not helpful or supportive. And so when those things happen, I will often stop and be like, okay, what's going on here? So I have a really cool story about when I really decided to do gratitude, like as a part of who I was, is my daughter has autism. And I was sitting with my therapist one day and he's like, let me just tell you, like a very general like outline of what autism is. Like, he's like, you and me, he's like, we have 10,000 buckets that we get to filter life through. Like, your kiddo with autism maybe has 10. And that's why that's why she talks about the same things. That's why she engages in the same activities, because she has these 10 buckets that she processes life through. And we have really kind of countless ones. And I remember sitting there that day, and later that afternoon, I was like, we may have 100,000 buckets to process life through, but we get to choose.
Yeah.
And I was like, I had this whole, like, when I first started coaching, I actually had this program called the Joy Filter Project. And it was like, how do we, and it was all at a basis of my daughter, but like, how do we choose to use the filter of gratitude?
Right.
Every day. Like, we get to use that choice because we have the opportunity to see, you know, the hard and the difficult. And within that, there's also the beauty. Like, with every hard and difficult moment, there's the beauty and gratitude. Yeah. Like, even in the most difficult things, like, I've really kind of, and that was a really big healing place for me too, because I started not just looking at the present moment, but I started going back through my whole life.
Yeah.
Like, where did I miss the mark? Those things that I felt were devastating to me, where's the gratitude in that? And that was the moment when I was actually able to heal.
Told you. Stop. Please stop. Hey, don't mess up my Facebook Live. Stop. Told ya. You were worried about your little dog bark.
I know. But like, that was the greatest source of healing. So if I think that there's ever a place that like can offer healing, like, gratitude is it, because you can't change what happens to you. Like, that's done. It happened. It's your lived experience. What we get to do in the present moment is change how we feel about it, change what we think about it, change how we perceive that thing to play out for the rest of our lives.
Yeah. I think that is it's so important for people to hear. I think that Liz just commented that it could be kittens, because yesterday we were doing a Facebook Live interview with someone and her kitten was behind her head. It was really funny. I think that is a really, really incredibly important point to make. Like, I think so often, and I've seen this with my own coaching clients, that people get stuck. And I think this is actually what's happening in the world right now. We're in the middle of a pandemic. We're in the middle of all these protests. We've got all this stuff going on. And people are getting stuck in the events that have happened and are really unable to see a way forward that isn't full of anger and resentment and challenge. And I think that this idea of thinking about how gratitude can be a great filter for moving forward and through is was so gorgeous, of a way to get through all of these really difficult, complicated things that we're wrestling with right now. So why is being grateful something you consider to be important?
Absolutely. I mean, like, a friend of mine, Britt Frank, she had mentioned one time in a class that I was doing with her, and she said, our mental health is our full commitment to reality. Like our ability to be mentally well is our ability to like have a full commitment to reality. And the reality of every situation is that there's something to be grateful in it, right? Even if it's hard, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it's like whatever that means. Also on the other side of that, the commitment to reality is that there's something to be grateful, is that we were meant to, and this is like my own philosophy, but we're meant to have the lived experiences that we do.
Yeah.
And that's powerful. Like when you decide that your experiences are a gift,
yeah,
that they were meant for you to be able to share with the world, everything's different.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's true. So, have you always, has your life changed since you began focusing on gratitude? So you talked about your joy project, that you first did when you first started coaching. You've talked a little bit about choosing to use a gratitude filter. Are there life-changing moments that you can identify that have shifted for you because you focused on gratitude? I mean, you've got foster kids, right? Like you've brought kids into your life that weren't biologically your own, which is a huge choice. How have these moments along your journey, how's your life changed since you've started focusing on gratitude?
So, and like when I say focusing on gratitude, I would say like when I told you like my healing began, I had a pretty traumatic event happen to me when I was 13 years old. Mm-hmm. And I felt like life happened to me instead of for me. Mm-hmm. And I spent 20 years of my life like navigating life through the filter that this could happen to me again, and that like I didn't have any control. And when I talk about this piece of the puzzle of like switching my perspective as to like all of these things were this, I'm grateful because they were the experience I was supposed to have. Mm-hmm. That moment and that piece of the puzzle changed everything for me going forward. Mm-hmm. And it was the perspective shift. And I mean, gratitude, I would guess like can be the same as like, I don't really see the difference as the perspective, it's the same thing to me. Gratitude and gratitude and the ability to believe that the things that happen to us are supposed to happen to us. Those are very much the same thing to me. And that piece was when I was like, okay, I don't have to be a victim anymore. I get to be in the driver's seat and I get to choose. And I get to be responsible for my experience. And I get to take ownership over the things in my life. And I don't have to, like everybody else, like you get to take ownership over your stuff. My husband gets to take ownership over his stuff. Everybody else gets to take ownership over their own things. And I get to take ownership of mine. And part of that like was weaved together with gratitude, right? Like it was all like one in the same piece. Like I get to be grateful for my experience. I get to be grateful for my ownership in this piece of life. And my biggest holdback was that I wanted to take responsibility. Like when I'm talking about my own story, my biggest piece was that I wanted to take ownership and responsibility for other people's thoughts, feelings, and actions, because I felt like I could potentially manipulate all of those things. And when I started honing in on gratitude, it was like, no, I just get to be grateful because this is my experience.
I think that what you're talking about is something we are trained to do as women too. Like we're supposed to be responsible for how everybody's feeling. We're supposed to take care of everybody and make sure we're like checking in and are you okay? And how can I help you? And what falls apart because of that is that we forget to, engage in taking care of our soul, like our soul calling and what we're really asking for in the world, because we're trying to navigate everybody else's experiences to make sure that everything is okay. And I think that is just a really important point to talk, like to think about, is how do we sacrifice or push to the side what we're really called here and compelled here to do, because we're busy worrying about how everybody else is going to react. You know, I think we push aside gratitude in that way. So we've talked a little bit about this. You've talked about how your gratitude practice is messy, but how imperfect is your practice of gratitude?
How imperfect? I mean, I think that I do most things perfectly imperfect. I mean, right? You know, like some days I really have to like remind myself, like, no, there's a blessing in this. Like some days it's like, I don't want to. I mean, and that's like a really messy piece, right? Like that's really like sometimes my like imperfection is just that I'm like, no, I don't want to be grateful for this today. I don't want to be grateful for that today. I don't want to look at, you know, outside and look at the wildflowers and be so happy, right? So it's this process of like just letting yourself be. And I think that that piece of it also, you know, that imperfect piece of like not being able to do it all the time, not being able to show up with that filter on day in and day out, allows you to also appreciate it more on the other side, right? Like we can't experience the highs if we don't experience the lows.
Yeah.
And I think the imperfectness of it for me gives me the bottom so I can experience the top, right? It gives me those moments where I'm like, I can lock myself in the bathroom for 30 seconds and that feels amazing.
Yeah.
Right? Like I wouldn't have appreciated that and had gratitude for 30 seconds in a bathroom with no children had I not really felt the depths of like not having 30 seconds alone, right? And not being grateful for anything.
Yeah.
And so like, I think the imperfectness of it all also, you know, like makes it special.
Yeah, I think that's really, really true. I was talking to several of the people that I've interviewed for this, and Leah Dunlap, and Mary Houston's comments kind of mirror that in a way where they talk about that their gratitude practice really comes from being at the very bottom, right? Like they both talk about in their interviews. So for those of you that are watching this later, like go back and check those out because it's amazing. But they talked about being at the very bottom and not having anywhere else to go. And that was where they found gratitude. And I think that's really what you're talking about is there are moments and days where you're like, this is a hard no for me. And it's that 30 seconds of going, oh, but there is something that's going to, you know, that makes it okay. Right.
Right. And I think there's value though. There's value in not just pushing past those dark moments and there's hard moments. Like you have to feel like there's a reason we have a spectrum of emotions. Right. And it's not so we just feel like awesome all the time.
Yeah.
Like there is meaning in the hard stuff. There's meaning in the difficult stuff. And if we skip over that, we are missing out on so much of life.
Girl, if that is not a reflection of what's happening in this country right now, I don't know what is. Like all this avoidance of illness and death and grief and sadness and racism, like all the things. This whole country's like, oh, I don't want to feel any of these. No, I want to go back to shopping. I want to go back to having people serve me food. I want to go back to all these things. I don't want to feel this hard stuff. I don't want to feel. I want to numb out. I don't want to feel.
Right.
Such an important point.
And also, like, we have the ability to disassociate for a reason. Right? So in those moments, we use that ability that like God gave us to be able to cope, but then we pull ourselves back.
Yeah.
We don't get to stay there, right? With anything, we don't get to stay stuck in one place. If we need to take a break and then come back up. And then you stand back up and you keep going after it.
Absolutely. So good. What is one tool you can share with people that will help them recognize what to be grateful for?
One thing that I do often, and this is kind of my reflection piece, and this was really because it was fundamental in my, like, really healing my life. When you have a difficult thing that has happened, a difficult lived experience, and you haven't really been able to gravel around it, like, often I'll just sit down and I'll write all of the things that I'm really grateful for because of it, like, and actually make a practice of that particular thing, not so much like on a daily basis of like, oh, I'm grateful that, you know, I had a metal straw in my car, you know, versus having to just drink out of the cup or whatever that is, but to actually take the hard shit in your life, to take a deep look at it and use that piece. And like, you have to like somewhat prepare yourself, because often when you go back, like, we feel those things again. So it's going to bring some stuff up for you. But if you have the time and the space and the bandwidth in your life at the moment, go back to those places and try to reframe it. Like, the work that you can do with reframing those things is magic. And so I don't know if I have necessarily something that I can say, like, this is what you should do every day. But if you keep coming back to a thing in your life that you feel like you're stuck, like, why am I back here again? Like, that feeling of like, fuck, can I say that?
Oh, hell yeah.
Okay.
Like, no, it's me.
I was like, why are, okay. But like, when you go like, why am I here again? When you have those repeated moments, ask yourself, how can I be grateful? That process and that tool has changed my life.
I love it. I love it so much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for this lovely conversation.
Yes. Thank you for having me.
Is there a place where people can follow you or connect with you if they really want to?
Yeah, you can follow me. I don't do a whole lot of social media, but you can always follow me on Instagram. You're going to get a like decent dose of running and nature and my kids and my chickens. But yeah, you can follow me there. You can always reach out to me direct message if anybody has a question. You can follow me on Facebook or Instagram at Nicole K. Whiting. But I'm always open to chat with anyone. Yeah, I'm pretty real.
Yes, you are.
Kind of an open book.
About you.
I say things out loud that people don't like, that only stay in their head, you know.
Yeah, this is why we're friends, because your filter is less than many people's, and I appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining me today, love.
Yeah, thank you.